Did you know that a simple deceit, a well-planned lie, can change the destiny of an entire nation? The story of Jacob is full of twists and unexpected moments that challenge everything you think about faith, power, and destiny. But what you might not know is that one man's decision to deceive his own father set the stage for something much greater: the foundation of a nation. How did this happen? Stay with me until the end of this video to discover how a mistake can alter the course of history and change forever the fate of a family and an entire people. From the very first moments of his existence, Jacob stood out as a man destined to live intensely, between shadows and light, between deceit and redemption. He was not just the second son of Isaac and Rebekah, but the protagonist of a journey that would span generations and lay the foundations of a people. His life, more than a simple sequence of events, would be a plot filled with complexity, where the struggle for identity, love, and purpose would drive him forward. At birth, Jacob already carried with him a clear sign of his restless and determined nature. The moment he left Rebekah's womb, he was already in combat with his twin brother, Esau. The story of the struggle in the womb is not just a simple birth account, but a foretelling of a life marked by disputes and conquests. Jacob was, symbolically, fighting for something that transcended the moment: the right to the birthright, the right to be first, to be the chosen one. And this was not a trivial matter, for in those lands, the firstborn was more than a title. It was the key to leadership, to recognition, and above all, to legacy. But Jacob was not an ordinary man. He would not settle for the place given to him, the role that life offered him. What made him so unique was his ability to reinvent himself. He understood intuitively that challenges were not obstacles, but opportunities in disguise, and that victories were not given, but earned. He knew that if he wanted to achieve something beyond, something greater, he would need to fight, deceive, and even transform himself. He would not be the type of man to resign himself to fate. On the contrary, he would take it into his hands and shape it with cunning and willpower. Therefore, Jacob's character was forged in difficulties and deceptions, in mistakes and attempts to get things right. His path, often winding, would serve as a living example that life was not about being perfect, but about becoming who you are through lessons, successes, and failures. Moreover, his importance would not come just from how he conquered the world around him, but also from the depth of the internal transformations he would undergo. Jacob would not just be the man who would win his father's blessings and his brother's birthright. He would, in fact, become a new man, a man with a different name, a man marked by a divine encounter that would make him understand that, above all, he was chosen for something grand. Jacob, the deceiver, the fighter, would become Israel, the man of God, the patriarch of a nation. The significance of Jacob lies not only in what he did, but in who he became. He did not simply follow in the footsteps of others, but left a legacy so great that even today, his descendants are known as the children of Israel. His life, in a way, is the story of all of us, who seek to be more than we are, who search for answers to our restlessness, who challenge ourselves to grow, to change, to be reborn. And all of this starts with Jacob, the man who knew that to change the future, one must first change oneself. Even before seeing the light of day, Jacob was already immersed in a battle. The dispute was not over wealth or territories, but for something deeper, more essential: the right to be born as the firstborn. In the womb of his mother, Rebekah, he and his twin brother, Esau, engaged in an invisible struggle, a silent battle, where the forces of destiny seemed to unfold with every move. For Jacob, this would not just be a simple birth, but a battle for his identity, for his future. From the very first moment, he showed his competitive nature, determined not to be overshadowed. The story of the birth of Jacob and Esau begins with a prophecy. Rebekah, the mother of the twins, heard from God that, though they were brothers, there was a struggle inside her womb. "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from your body," said the Lord, indicating that the children would have different destinies. This revelation only intensified the competition, for the divine promise was clear: the older would rule over the younger. And so, what was already a dispute between twin brothers became a fight for supremacy, for leadership, for the title of firstborn. From the start, Jacob was the more restless. While Esau, the stronger and more adventurous brother, seemed to be the chosen one by natural law, Jacob, on the other hand, was constantly moving, looking for an opportunity. It was not just the desire to be first. It was the certainty that he had something more to offer, a capacity to overcome challenges and rewrite the rules. Rebekah's womb thus became a stage where the two brothers fought not only for a place in the world, but for the future of their families. Jacob's movements within his mother were like small signs of his determination. When Esau moved, strong and confident, Jacob followed his rhythm hurriedly, seeking his place, his victory. The cramped and confined space of the womb became the perfect metaphor for the challenges Jacob would face throughout his life. For him, the space was too small, and he was constantly pushing the boundaries, seeking to break through the limits imposed by nature and tradition. This drive, this desire to conquer more than seemed possible, would define him in all stages of his journey. And then the moment came. The birth was not just a physical transition, but the manifestation of everything Jacob already was. Someone who would challenge expectations, who would not be content with what life gave him. When he finally emerged from Rebekah's womb, Jacob did so with a clear purpose: to grab Esau literally by the heel. In a nearly symbolic gesture, he clung to his brother's foot, as if already knowing that his fight would be constant, that he would always need to take one step ahead to claim what he desired. Jacob and Esau were now in the world, and although they were twins, their destinies would be radically different. Jacob had already demonstrated his insightful nature, his burning desire not just to exist, but to make a difference, to stand out. And somehow, that struggle in Rebekah's womb represented more than just a dispute between two brothers. It was, in fact, a reflection of something greater. The constant struggle we all face in seeking our place in the world, in trying to overcome the limitations imposed on us, and in fighting, even when the odds are against us. Jacob had always known that the world was not generous to the weak, and from a young age, he understood that success was not just about merit, but about cunning. The birthright, the right to be first, was something he desired with the same intensity with which he aspired to be recognized, to be the chosen one. But this possession would not come easily, for Esau, his twin brother, was strong, fearless, and his father Isaac's favorite. For Jacob, a more tortuous path remained, a strategy that would test his limits and his morality. It all began on a hot, humid summer day, when Esau, after an exhausting day of hunting, returned home hungry and exhausted. The need for food became urgent, and upon seeing Jacob cooking a dish of lentils, Esau, without thinking, went straight to the point. "Give me some of that red food, for I am nearly dying of hunger," he said, unaware that this simple request would become a pivotal moment in the fate of both brothers. Jacob saw his chance. He knew this was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a weakness in Esau that he could exploit. But what he offered Esau was not just food. It was the exchange of something infinitely more valuable. "Sell me your birthright now, and I will give you this dish of lentils," Jacob replied, his voice serious and determined. In that moment of desperate hunger, Esau did not think about the consequences. What mattered most to him was satisfying his immediate need. The birthright, it was just a formality. He believed there would still be time for greater achievements, that the value of being the firstborn did not outweigh the value of his hunger. Without hesitation, he agreed, unaware of the weight that this simple exchange would have on the future of his family. For Jacob, this was not just a simple bargain. It was a calculated move, a victory disguised as a simple gesture, but one that would place him in a position of power. By making Esau trade his birthright for a bowl of lentils, Jacob wasn't just satisfying his own hunger. He was cunningly gaining the right to inherit the blessing that would traditionally be given to the firstborn. The scene, seemingly simple at first, reveals Jacob's nature. He didn't act out of malice, but from a sharp understanding of what was at stake. He knew that the future of his family would be decided by who held this right. And he also knew that the value of things is often not what it seems. To him, that bowl of lentils was just the beginning of a bigger game, where he would emerge victorious, even if the victory was achieved by unconventional means. But what Jacob did not foresee was that this deception, however simple, would have repercussions far beyond that simple meal. What he gained in that moment was not just a temporary blessing, but a weight of responsibility that would follow him throughout his life. This act, though cunning, would also make him confront his own nature, the choices he made, and the price he would be willing to pay to achieve what he desired. The story of Jacob and Esau is not only marked by the brothers themselves, but also by the intervention of their mother, Rebekah. She was the one who, more than anyone else, understood the intertwined destinies of her sons and knew that her family's future would not follow the traditional mold. The revelation she received from God, that the older would serve the younger, was etched in her mind and heart, and she believed that this destiny had to be fulfilled, no matter the means. She could not allow Esau, with his impulsive and carefree nature, to be the one to receive Isaac's blessing. For her, Jacob was the true heir, the more astute one, the one who had the vision necessary to lead the future of the family. And it was when Isaac, now old and losing his sight, decided to bless Esau, the firstborn, that Rebekah saw a chance to make the destiny unfold. The patriarch, feeling his days were numbered, asked Esau to go hunting and prepare a delicious meal for him, just the way he liked it, so that upon his return, he could receive his blessing. This would be Isaac's final act before he died, and he saw it as the moment to pass on the authority and leadership of the family to his eldest son. But Rebekah knew this would not be the right future for the family. So, she devised a bold plan. Convinced that she needed to take fate into her own hands, she went to Jacob and, in a whispering voice, told him her plan. He would disguise himself as Esau and, with the meal she had prepared, deceive Isaac, thus receiving his father's blessing. The idea was daring and fraught with risk, but Rebekah was certain it was the only way to ensure Jacob's destiny, as God had promised. Jacob, though suspicious, agreed to the plan. He knew the deception his mother suggested would be a risky move, but at the same time, he trusted his own cunning to carry it out. So, with Rebekah's help, he dressed in Esau's clothes, covered himself with goat skins to mimic his brother's rough skin, and prepared the dish Isaac so loved. When he entered his father's tent, Jacob's heart raced. Isaac, whose vision was blurred by age, didn't immediately suspect anything. He smelled Esau's clothes and touched Jacob's skin, recognizing it as his eldest son's. But something was off. The voice wasn't Esau's, it was Jacob's. Still, with a heavy heart and the blessing about to be given, Isaac, uncertain, decided to bless Jacob. "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and an abundance of grain and wine," Isaac said, pronouncing the blessing that, by right, should have gone to Esau. It was a moment of triumph for Jacob, but at the same time, a dark victory, built on lies and deception. When Esau returned with the hunt, the truth hit like a blow. He approached his father with the meal he had prepared, ready to receive the blessing. But when he discovered what had happened, Esau's rage was immense, and the resentment he felt toward Jacob would be the spark that ignited a fire of hatred and revenge. From that moment on, the relationships in Isaac's household would never be the same. The blessing Jacob received with so much effort and cunning deception would turn into a burden, a mark that would follow him for the rest of his life. Rebekah, though convinced she had done what was necessary to ensure the fulfillment of destiny, knew her plan had serious consequences. Esau's revenge would not take long to arrive, and she feared Jacob would be dragged into an endless conflict. So, she advised her son to flee, to escape to her brother Laban's house in Haran until Esau's anger subsided. Rebekah knew she had made a decisive move, but now Jacob's future was at stake, and he would have to face the consequences of his actions in a new land, where more deceptions and trials awaited him. With the blessing in his hands and the anger of his brother still ringing in his ears, Jacob knew he could not stay home any longer. What should have been a moment of triumph had turned into a desperate flight. He, who had always been astute and calculating, now felt the reality of his choices closing in on him. The lie that had built his father's trust and stolen his brother's future was about to exact its price. The fire of Esau's revenge would not be easily extinguished, and Jacob, once again, would have to escape the consequences of his actions. Rebekah, his mother, was the one who advised him to leave immediately. She knew the situation had become untenable and that if Jacob stayed, his life would be at risk. Her plan now was for him to flee to Haran, where he could find refuge in his uncle Laban's house, a relative who would be out of Esau's reach and who could offer Jacob a fresh start. This journey was not just an escape. It was also a chance to begin anew, to rewrite his story in a distant place. With a heavy heart but determination on his face, Jacob bid farewell to his mother. He didn't know when, or if, he would ever see her again. The family bonds were broken, and he, on his journey, would have to learn to cope with loneliness and the weight of his choices. Deep down, he knew this escape would only be the beginning of a long path, and what awaited him in Haran was still a mystery. The journey was not easy. Jacob crossed barren deserts, facing the relentless nature and distance, now without the warmth of family protection. He traveled alone, carrying the weight of guilt and the uncertainty of the future, but also with the hope that somewhere far away, he would find a new beginning. The road to Haran was long, and Jacob needed strength not only to endure physical exhaustion, but also to deal with the inner conflicts that arose with every step. What he had done to Esau was not easy to forget, but it was what he believed necessary to secure his place in the world. Doubt and regret began to surface in his mind, but he could not turn back. And it was during a lonely night, when the sky was clear and the stars lit up the vast desert, that Jacob encountered something greater than himself. Tired from the long journey, he decided to rest and used a stone as a pillow. As he slept, in the darkness of the night, he had a dream that would mark the rest of his life. He saw a ladder, tall and shining, reaching up to heaven, with angels ascending and descending upon it. At the top of the ladder stood God, who spoke to him directly, reaffirming the promise that he would receive the land that his grandparents, Abraham and Sarah, had been given. God not only renewed the promise, but also promised to be with Jacob, guiding and protecting him on his journey. This dream was a turning point, a moment when Jacob, in his solitude and flight, felt for the first time the presence of something greater than his cunning and lies. God spoke to him, assuring him that despite his mistakes and questionable choices, he was not alone. From that moment on, Jacob knew that his journey to Haran was not just an escape, but also a path of transformation, redemption, and perhaps a destiny even greater than he had imagined. When he awoke, Jacob, astonished and fearful, rose and called that place Bethel, meaning house of God. He then made a vow, promising that if God protected him on his journey and brought him back safely, he would give God a tithe of everything he received. The journey, now marked by a divine promise, took on a new direction. Jacob was no longer just fleeing from Esau. He was being guided by a higher power, one that would transform not only the course of his life, but also the history of the people of Israel. Thus, with his heart renewed by the celestial vision, Jacob continued his journey toward Haran, still unaware of the difficulties he would face but certain that something much greater than himself was behind all of this. The future, now more enigmatic, promised challenges, but also the opportunity to find a new path for himself. Jacob's long journey, marked by doubts and fears, took an unexpected turn on that lonely night when he rested at Bethel. The vastness of the desert stretched before him, but in that moment, something deeper and immeasurable seemed to stretch before him. The sky, the promise of a future beyond the reach of his eyes, yet so close to his heart. And it was in the silence of that night that Jacob's destiny was marked by a dream that would change everything. Jacob slept deeply, exhausted from the journey, but what awaited him in that sleep was not just rest, but a revelation that would leave an eternal mark on his soul. He found himself in a place where heaven and earth met, and in the center of this vision was a ladder, which seemed to touch the stars and extend into the very heavens. Angels, divine beings, were ascending and descending the ladder, as if on an endless mission between heaven and earth, communicating with something beyond human comprehension. The spectacle before Jacob was indescribable, something that transcended the limits of any earthly vision. At the base of the ladder, God was present, radiant and powerful, speaking directly to Jacob with a clear and comforting voice. "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you are lying, I will give to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and they will spread to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants." These words, powerful and comforting, filled Jacob's heart with a fire he had never known. Suddenly, the loneliness of his journey and the mistakes of the past didn't seem so heavy. He was no longer just fleeing from the consequences of his choices. Now, he was being chosen for something much greater. God was offering him something grand: the promised land, the continuation of the covenant made with his grandparents, and a lineage that would bring blessings to the entire world. The ladder, with its angels ascending and descending, represented not only divine communication, but also the connection between heaven and earth, between the human and the divine. When Jacob awoke, stunned by the intensity of the dream, he felt that the reality around him had changed. He was no longer just a man on the run, nor the deceiver who had robbed his brother of his inheritance. Now, he knew he had been touched by something sacred, by a divine promise that could not be ignored. He, who had started his journey alone, now understood that he was no longer just searching for a new beginning. He was being guided by a greater force, and the path ahead was much more than he could have imagined. With a mix of awe and reverence, Jacob rose and looked around. The land where he had been lying now seemed different. Bethel, the place that had once been just a point in the desert, had become the place where God had manifested to him, where he had seen the vision of the heavenly ladder. In gratitude and recognition, Jacob made a vow to God, promising that if he was truly guided and protected during his journey, he would dedicate his life to serving this powerful God. As a symbol of his covenant, Jacob took the stone he had rested on and set it up as an altar, uniting the earthly with the divine, and consecrated the place as Bethel, the house of God. Jacob's path, once a journey of escape and insecurity, was now becoming a path of faith, guided by the divine promise. He knew that the journey stretching before him was more than just an escape from the past. It was a search for something greater, for a destiny sealed in heaven, one that would bring transformation not only to him, but to all his descendants. And so, with a renewed heart, Jacob continued on, with a clearer vision of his purpose, his mission, and his connection to the divine. What had once seemed like just a simple dream was now becoming a living reality, and Jacob was ready to face it head-on. As Jacob continued his journey, carrying with him God's promise and a new sense of destiny, he did not know that the next great change in his life was about to happen. The road to Haran was still long, and the difficulties of the journey continued to show themselves with each new day. But in his heart, Jacob felt that something special lay ahead, something that would profoundly change the course of his story. After many days of travel, Jacob finally reached a great city, the entrance to Haran, where he felt for the first time at home, despite being far from his homeland. The heat of the desert sun had given way to the cool breeze of the mountains, and the landscape around him provided relief to the weary traveler. When he arrived at the city's well, he saw that several sheep were gathered around. But what caught his attention was not just the animals, but the figure of a young woman approaching, leading the flock with a unique grace. Jacob, still somewhat lost in his thoughts, couldn't help but notice Rachel. She was there, so full of life, so radiant in her simplicity, that she seemed almost like a vision from another world. Her black hair gleamed under the sun, and her eyes, like the clear morning sky, reflected a purity that touched Jacob's heart. He didn't know exactly what he felt, but something inside him told him that she would be the key to what God had prepared for him. The young Rachel, the daughter of Laban, Jacob's uncle, didn't know what fate had in store for her as she approached a stranger she barely knew. But Jacob felt something immediate. Almost impulsively, he ran to her, and the first thing he did was move the stone covering the well's mouth, an act that would require the strength of several men. He didn't think twice, acting quickly as if an invisible force was pushing him. Rachel was surprised, but at the same time charmed by the kindness and strength of the man, who, in a simple gesture, helped her in a way no one else would have. When their eyes met, Jacob felt the weight of the world disappear. It was as if his life had found a new purpose, a new path. He approached Rachel and, in a moment of intense emotion, kissed her, something that, although not common between strangers, seemed so natural between the two of them. Without hesitation, Jacob explained who he was and told the story of his arrival in Haran. Rachel, surprised and moved, ran home to tell her father about the encounter, and soon Jacob's story spread throughout the city. Laban, his uncle, welcomed Jacob with open arms, offering him shelter and a place in his house. However, Jacob knew that his life was about to change in a way he couldn't anticipate. From that moment on, his destiny was intertwined with Rachel's, and although the future was still uncertain, Jacob knew he had found something precious. He felt that, in meeting Rachel, he was not only coming closer to his family, but also taking a step toward the fulfillment of God's plan for his life. Raquel, in turn, also felt an immediate connection with Jacob. She saw him through the eyes of someone who recognizes a man with a big heart, but also someone with a special destiny, as if, in some way, she was meant to be part of this plan. She knew that their future would not be simple, but in her heart, there was a certainty. They were destined to live something great together. In that moment, between glances and unspoken words, Jacob and Rachel knew that, although the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, they were about to embark on a journey of love, dedication, and discoveries that would change their lives forever. And so, amid the heat of the desert and the coolness of Haran, Jacob found Rachel, and from that moment on, his future was intertwined with hers, as part of a divine story that would unfold before them. After meeting Rachel, Jacob once again felt propelled by an energy that seemed to come from the heavens themselves. He knew his life was changing, but there was still something to be done before he could live the love he had found. To win Rachel's hand, Jacob made a promise to his uncle Laban. He would work for 7 years in exchange for his niece. The deal was sealed, and Jacob devoted all his energy, hoping that his journey and sacrifice would be rewarded with the woman he already loved deeply. During those 7 years, Jacob showed his strength and dedication. He would rise early, take care of the flocks, and spared no effort to please Laban. His passion for Rachel grew each day, and time seemed to pass quickly for him. However, the 7 years, though seeming short, were also preparing him for something deeper. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to face a deception that would change the course of his life. The big day arrived. Jacob was excited and euphoric, barely able to wait to marry Rachel. When the night of the wedding came, Laban prepared everything with great ceremony. But something was about to happen that Jacob could never have predicted. In the dark of the night, Laban's trick would unfold with cruel precision. Laban, cunningly, decided to deceive Jacob. Instead of giving Rachel, his youngest daughter and the one Jacob loved, Laban tricked him by giving his eldest daughter, Leah, who, though respectful and kind, was not the woman Jacob desired. That night, Jacob, caught up in the celebrations and with the darkness covering the bride's face, didn't notice the switch. He united with Leah, believing it was Rachel, and by morning, the cruel reality hit him. When he woke up and saw Leah's face beside him, Jacob was shocked and furious. He felt betrayed and deceived, but at the same time confused, as he had trusted Laban. Desperate, Jacob went to Laban to confront him, and what he heard was his uncle's justification, who, with a sly smile, said that in their land, it was tradition for the eldest daughter to marry first. He couldn't simply give Rachel to Jacob without following the customs of the region. Jacob, outraged but still longing for Rachel, demanded a solution. Laban, with a deceitful laugh, offered Rachel, but with the condition that Jacob would have to work another 7 years to have her as his wife. The humiliation and deception Jacob suffered were not just a blow to his pride, but also a harsh lesson about the nature of human relationships and the choices we make. Laban, with his manipulation, had twisted the promise made to Jacob, but at the same time, he knew that Jacob was so determined to have Rachel that he couldn't refuse the offer. Jacob, though furious, decided to move forward. He worked another 7 years, hoping to finally unite with the woman he so deeply loved. From that moment, Jacob learned how painful the path of broken promises and unmet expectations could be. But he also knew that, although he had been deceived, his love for Rachel was strong enough to withstand it. Jacob's destiny, now intertwined with Leah's, Rachel's, and Laban's, was shaped by this trial. He would become a wiser, more determined man and, above all, more aware that life, with all its deceptions and twists, still held opportunities for those who knew how to wait and fight for what they truly desired. Jacob's destiny, marked by deceptions and challenges, continued to unfold in a complex and often painful way. Despite having finally married Rachel, the love of his life, he was still tied to Leah, his unplanned wife, and the situation in Laban's household became increasingly tense and full of rivalry. What should have been a home of joy and prosperity for Jacob turned into an emotional battleground between the two sisters, who, over the years, competed not only for Jacob's love, but also for his heart's approval. Leah, the eldest daughter, felt rejected, marked by the lack of true love from Jacob. Although he was good and kind to her, the love he had for Rachel was undeniable, and this made her suffer. Leah wanted to be loved, desired the heart of the man she had married, but she knew that he only had eyes for her sister. In her pain, Leah clung to the hope that by giving Jacob children, she would finally earn what she longed for, a place in his heart that belonged to Rachel. Rachel, on the other hand, struggled with the frustration of not being able to conceive, while Leah, in what seemed like a twist of fate, began to give Jacob children one after another. The emptiness Rachel felt was deep, an ache that seemed impossible to fill. The rivalry between the two sisters intensified with each birth, and what should have been a blessing became a burden. Rachel's pain turned into jealousy, and her desperate pursuit of motherhood led her to make decisions that put her on a collision course with her sister and ultimately with Jacob. Rachel's suffering reached a breaking point. She knew that Leah was winning the race of motherhood, and it tore her apart. In a moment of despair, Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob, hoping she could bear children in her place. Leah, not wanting to be left behind, did the same and gave her servant Zilpah. What followed was a frantic race to see who could bear more children for Jacob, an endless cycle of disputes and intrigue. Bilhah and Zilpah, though concubines, became central figures in this drama, giving birth to children who, in some way, challenged the identity of Rachel and Leah. Jacob's household, instead of being a place of unity and harmony, became a battleground of vanity, love, and suppressed desperation. Leah and Rachel, in their struggle for Jacob's heart, even used their servants to win the patriarchs' attention. But what they were building was a rivalry that only intensified as the years went by. Jacob, torn between the two women and feeling the weight of his promises and decisions, no longer knew how to balance his home. He loved Rachel deeply, but he also had responsibilities toward Leah and their children. The house was filled with screams, tears, and the constant restlessness of someone who tries unsuccessfully to please everyone. The space for love, which should have been the foundation of his home, was being eroded by competition, selfishness, and insecurity. Jacob, while trying to stay strong, found himself trapped between the two women, both of his hearts torn by the immense rivalry they had created. Still, Jacob's relationship with his wives was not just a battle of egos. There were moments of reconciliation and even silent understanding. Deep down, Rachel and Leah knew that their rivalries could not go on for much longer, for Jacob's love could not be forced. Each child Jacob had with them represented more than just a bond of blood. They were, in some way, the hope of a peace that never came. And so, between the pain of competition and the search for acceptance, Jacob and his wives continued to navigate the turbulent waters of their home, aware that what had been planted in this field of disputes would still bear fruit, though it would be the fruit of a complicated, fragile love that was, at the same time, immeasurably deep. Amid the turmoil of his household, where rivalries and disputes seemed endless, Jacob experienced an unexpected joy. The winds of fortune had finally shifted in his favor. Rachel, his beloved wife, who had long struggled with infertility, was finally pregnant. The news of her pregnancy brought a quiet relief to both Jacob and Rachel, as it was the long-awaited sign that heaven seemed to finally be smiling upon her. Throughout the years of suffering and uncertainty, Rachel never stopped believing that she would be able to give Jacob a child. That dream, which had seemed impossible, was about to become a reality. When the first signs of pregnancy became evident, Jacob felt a mix of joy and apprehension. His home, marked by the competition among his wives, seemed to calm with the hope that Rachel carried. The news spread quickly, and although Leah and the concubines had children, there was something about Rachel that made the child she carried more than just a baby. He would be, for Jacob, a symbol of a love that overcame all challenges. The months of waiting were filled with anxiety. Rachel, full of care and tenderness toward her pregnancy, felt the pressure grow. Each passing day brought more expectation, as she knew how important this birth would be for her life and her relationship with Jacob. When the moment finally arrived, Jacob and Rachel were ready to welcome the divine gift that would change everything. The birth of Joseph, the much-desired son, was marked by immense joy and a sense of renewal. For Jacob, it felt as though the weight of years of conflict, deceit, and insecurity was suddenly lifted. He saw in the newborn's face a promise of hope, a symbol of the continuation of his legacy, but also of love, the very thing he had always longed for in his life. Rachel, though exhausted, couldn't hide the happiness in her eyes, as she had finally achieved what her heart had longed for. Joseph, Rachel's son, became the center of Jacob's life. He was the son Jacob had always dreamed of having, the son he saw as a reflection of his own journey. His relationship with Joseph was not like that with his other children. Jacob had an unusual affection for him, something that went beyond the natural bond between father and son. Joseph was not just another child. He represented the renewed hope of a life free from the shadows of rivalry and betrayal. The love Jacob felt for Joseph was evident in his gestures and actions. He treated his son with special affection, which did not go unnoticed by the other children. Jacob's adoration for Joseph, combined with the fact that he was Rachel's son, the beloved wife, stirred deep jealousy among the brothers. This jealousy soon grew larger as Joseph, still a child, began to stand out. Jacob, immersed in his paternal love, made Joseph a coat of many colors, something that became a symbol of the love he had for that son. The coat was not just clothing, but a symbol of distinction and privilege, something that separated Joseph from the other children and further fueled animosity between them. The difference in Jacob's treatment and affection toward Joseph was undeniable, and this fueled resentment and hatred among the other brothers. Joseph, for his part, with his youth and confidence, didn't fully realize the impact of his privileged position. He dreamed of greatness and shared his dreams with his brothers, unaware of how much these dreams bothered them. He dreamed of a future where the others would bow before him, and unknowingly began to cultivate the seed of a plot that would soon unfold into a family drama that would change everyone's destiny. The birth of Joseph, although a moment of joy for Jacob and Rachel, also became a harbinger of an unpredictable future. where the feelings of Joseph's other brothers, fueled by envy and rivalry, would end up defining the trajectory of Jacob's family and lead them to distant and unimaginable destinies. Jacob's life, now marked by his great affection for Joseph, was not only about family and emotional matters. Although the dynamics within his household were complex and full of conflicts, Jacob, being a pragmatic and intelligent man, knew he had to ensure the sustenance and prosperity of his large family. As a shepherd of flocks, he began to develop a remarkable business sense, which not only brought him success, but also transformed the dynamics between him and his father-in-law Laban. The relationship between Jacob and Laban, which had once been based on mutual collaboration and even a certain dependency, began to sour. Laban, always shrewd and greedy, tried to take advantage of Jacob. During the years Jacob had worked hard to win Rachel's hand, and then another 7 years to marry her, he had been compensated with the right to tend Laban's flocks. The work was exhausting, and the conditions were far from ideal, but Jacob never complained, always focused on his goal of creating a family and prospering. Over time, Jacob realized that Laban was trying to cheat him. Although he had worked tirelessly for years, Laban seemed to find ways to alter their agreements and make the terms even more disadvantageous for Jacob. The final straw came when Laban tried to change the working conditions, offering him nothing in exchange for his immense contributions. However, Jacob was no man to be at the mercy of others. In his cunning, he decided it was time to turn the tables. He began to use his cleverness to make his own flocks multiply quickly, in a way no one could predict. Jacob noticed that the animals, especially the sheep and goats, were more likely to give birth when they were near certain types of rods. So, he came up with an idea that combined his observational skills with an intelligent method to ensure the success of his flocks. Jacob placed striped and spotted rods in front of the pregnant females, and as if by miracle, most of the offspring born after the process were marked with the same pattern. Laban, who initially didn't understand what was happening, soon realized that Jacob was prospering in a surprising way. He became furious upon realizing that his son-in-law was using his own cleverness to increase the flocks, while he, as the owner, was losing control. But Jacob knew that his time there was running out and that he needed to start planning his departure. With a well-thought-out strategy, Jacob began to accumulate wealth in an increasingly obvious way. His flocks were stronger and healthier, and he possessed a growing number of sheep and goats, far more than Laban had ever imagined. At the same time, the conditions that had once been imposed upon him began to reverse, and Jacob found himself with financial autonomy that allowed him to envision freedom from his relationship with Laban. Jacob's cunning, which had guided him through difficult moments over the years, once again shone through. Not only did he use his wisdom to thrive in a hostile environment, but he also made Laban realize that if he wanted to continue benefiting from Jacob's services, he would need to be more fair. However, Jacob knew that his situation with Laban was untenable, and the time to leave was approaching. With the growing wealth and power he was accumulating, Jacob planned his escape to leave Haran and eventually return to his homeland, the house of his father, Isaac. But before moving forward, he had to face the dilemma of how to leave without provoking Laban's anger, as he would surely be furious to discover that his son-in-law had left everything behind without warning. Jacob's business acumen was not merely a matter of survival, but a way to show that he was more than a man deceived by fate. He was not just a man who had fought to get what he wanted, but a strategist who, even amid adversity, knew how to adapt and use his skills in a way that would guarantee his success. His prosperous flocks were a reflection of his sharp mind, a symbol of the intelligence and perseverance of a man who knew that life would not be handed to him on a silver platter. He would take it with his own hands, in the way he knew best. Jacob's time in Haran, under the shadow of Laban, had come to an end. The years of hard labor and growing resentment on both sides had finally reached a breaking point. Jacob's business acumen had earned him a considerable fortune, but his relationship with his father-in-law was becoming increasingly unsustainable. Laban, who had always tried to deceive Jacob and change the terms of their agreements, had unknowingly incited the wrath of his son-in-law, who was already beginning to plan a strategic exit. Jacob knew he could no longer stay in Haran. He had to leave, and that decision was irrevocable. But the question was how to escape without drawing Laban's anger, who now saw Jacob's growing wealth as a direct threat to his own power. Jacob did not trust Laban or his sons, and he knew that any hasty move could result in relentless pursuit. Moreover, his family was now in a vulnerable position, as he was responsible for Rachel, Leah, their children, and the concubines. Everyone's safety depended on his ability to plan the escape discreetly. With the characteristic shrewdness of his life, Jacob devised a carefully calculated plan. He gathered his family and, under the cover of night, began to prepare for the escape. The decision to leave was risky, but Jacob saw no other option. What he didn't know, however, was that Rachel, his beloved wife, was about to make her own decision that would add even more complexity to the situation. Rachel, who had always been extremely loyal to Jacob, also had her own reasons for wanting to leave her father's house. Her relationship with Laban had become unbearable to her as well, especially after years of frustrations with her infertility and constant competition with Leah. But her loyalty to Jacob ran deep, and she decided to support her husband's decision to leave. However, Rachel was carrying a secret she knew could complicate matters even further. She had stolen her father's household idols, sacred objects that represented Laban's power and authority. These idols were not just symbols of worship, but also of control over the wealth and fortunes of his house. By taking them, Rachel was not only physically fleeing, but also challenging her father's spiritual and material power. As Jacob's family moved under the cover of night, danger was closing in. When Laban woke the next day and realized his house was empty, he was furious. With his heart filled with rage, he gathered his men and set out in pursuit. Jacob knew he would be hunted, but he had no choice but to press on. His family depended on him. The tension on the journey was palpable. The escape, which had seemed simple at first, quickly turned into a race against time. The journey was marked by uncertainties, with Jacob knowing that Laban, a relentless and vengeful man, would not hesitate to seek revenge. But when Laban finally caught up to Jacob, the confrontation that seemed inevitable took an unexpected turn. Jacob, fearful, prayed to God for protection, and God heard his prayer. In the midst of the pursuit, God appeared to Laban in a dream, warning him not to harm Jacob. When Laban awoke, though angry, he dared not harm Jacob. He had to accept his son-in-law's departure, but not without confronting him first. When Jacob and Laban met, the words were sharp. Laban accused Jacob of deception and betrayal, but Jacob, with the dignity he had left, explained that he had left out of fear that Laban would not let him go. He then, finally, learned of the theft of the idols and demanded that Rachel return them. However, Rachel, with great skill, hid the idols, sitting on them and deceiving Laban. She knew that for Jacob, the idols held no significance, but for her father, they were symbols of dominion and authority. Rachel was unwilling to give up what she had already taken. The confrontation between Jacob and Laban ended without a physical battle, but with a sharp exchange of words and accusations from both sides. Laban, even though he could not punish Jacob, still tried to establish an alliance to ensure that in the future, their families would not harm each other. After a feast to seal the peace, Jacob and Laban parted ways, heading in opposite directions. Jacob's escape from Laban's house was not just a matter of physical escape, but also a turning point in the patriarch's life. He had shown that, despite being deceived and treated unjustly, his shrewdness, faith, and courage were stronger than any adversity. Now, with his family by his side, Jacob was ready to face the next chapter of his journey, a chapter that would ultimately lead him back to the promised land. The winds were changing for Jacob. After a tumultuous escape from Laban's house, with a new load of wealth and goods, Jacob now faced one of the greatest challenges of his life: his reunion with Esau, his twin brother. This was a meeting he both feared and longed for. Jacob knew that Esau's anger against him was still alive, fueled by the events of the past, when he had deceived his brother, stealing his birthright and his father's blessing. Esau's resentment was something that would not easily dissipate. For years, Jacob had lived with the weight of this sin, and now he would have to face the consequences of his actions. Upon hearing that Esau was coming to meet him with an army of 400 men, Jacob felt a wave of fear and anxiety. Although he was now a wealthy man, with many possessions and children, he couldn't shake the fear that his brother might come for violent revenge. The pressure of such a meeting was overwhelming, and Jacob didn't know what to expect. He knew he couldn't just face Esau with the same words and attitudes as before. He would need to be strategic, but also sincere. Jacob prepared for the meeting in a way that blended wisdom with humility. He divided his belongings into groups so that if one part was attacked, the rest would have a chance to escape. Each group of animals, sheep, goats, cattle, and camels, was to be sent as a gift to his brother, hoping to soothe his anger. Jacob knew that in ancient times, a valuable gift could be the key to healing an old offense, and he clung to this idea. As the gifts were sent, Jacob also prayed, asking God for protection. He knew that his journey would not be complete without his brother's forgiveness, and more than anything, he wanted to restore peace between them. During the night, as preparations for the meeting continued, Jacob had a mysterious and transformative experience. In the stillness of the night, Jacob was confronted by an enigmatic figure, a man, or an angel, who appeared suddenly, as if from nowhere. They began to wrestle, and the struggle was fierce. Jacob, with all his strength and determination, resisted for hours, refusing to give in. This man, who Jacob later learned was a heavenly being, did not seem to want to defeat him immediately. Instead, he challenged him, not only physically but spiritually. Jacob's struggle at that moment was more than a physical confrontation. It was an inner battle. He was facing his past, his mistakes, and the fight to find his true identity. When the man saw that Jacob would not give up, he touched his thigh and dislocated it. The pain was immense, but Jacob did not pull away. He held firm, asking for a blessing. The man, moved by Jacob's perseverance, then gave him a new identity, the name Israel, meaning he who struggles with God. It was a new beginning, a new journey for Jacob, not only as a man, but as someone who had faced his own flaws and overcome his fears. With the dawn, Jacob rose, now marked by the struggle. His thigh was injured, but his spirit was strengthened. He knew that his reunion with Esau was inevitable, but now he was ready to face him with a humble heart, more confident in his renewed identity. When he saw Esau approaching, his anxiety returned, but he knew he had to take the next step. Esau, seeing Jacob approaching, surprised him. Instead of showing anger or a thirst for revenge, he ran to meet Jacob and embraced him with tears in his eyes. The resentment that Jacob feared would be eternally dissipated in that moment. That embrace was Jacob's liberation. He finally understood that peace with his brother did not come from his wealth or gifts, but from the simple act of reconciliation and acknowledging his flaws. Esau, who had been blessed by their father, did not carry the weight of bitterness. Brotherly love and forgiveness flowed in that moment, and what began as a tense, fear-filled encounter ended in an emotional reconciliation. Jacob, with his heart relieved, offered Esau his gifts, but more importantly, he gave him his forgiveness, which he never knew he longed for so much. This reunion, marked by Jacob's change and Esau's generosity, sealed a new chapter in both of their lives. They went their separate ways, but now, without the chains of the past, they could finally move forward. For Jacob, this moment represented the end of a long journey of mistakes and fears, and the beginning of a life of true peace with his family, especially with his brother, with whom he had so longed to reconcile. The reunion with Esau brought Jacob a sense of relief, but at the same time, a feeling of unease. Despite the reconciliation with his brother, Jacob felt incomplete, as though there was something much greater he still needed to face than his struggles with Laban or Esau. Something he could not avoid, and that manifested in his soul. He knew his journey was not yet over. Peace with Esau was not enough to erase the weight of his conscience. He felt that he still needed to confront his past, and the most challenging place to do so would be in his own identity and relationship with God. After meeting with Esau, Jacob moved on, now alone, towards the Jabbok River, an isolated and mysterious place. The river, with its turbulent and deep waters, seemed to reflect the inner turmoil Jacob carried. The banks of the Jabbok represented more than just a physical geography. They were the boundary between the old Jacob, the deceiver, and the new Jacob, the man who began to see himself as one who had wrestled with God and survived. He knew that, in this place, something supernatural had to happen. As the night progressed, Jacob withdrew into solitude. But the solitude was not peaceful. It was filled with an unexpected struggle. During the night, a mysterious being appeared before him, and without warning, they began to wrestle. Jacob did not know who or what this being was, but by the intensity and strength of the confrontation, he realized it was not a simple physical battle. This struggle had a spiritual depth, something beyond what he could comprehend at that moment. The being Jacob wrestled with seemed invincible, but with his strength and persistence, Jacob stood firm. The fight lasted all night. Fatigue began to take over Jacob, but he did not give up. He felt he could not surrender now, not when something so profound and important was at stake. As dawn approached, the being touched Jacob's thigh, dislocating it painfully. The suffering was immense, but still, Jacob did not let go of the being, insisting that it bless him. It was in this moment of pain, while his thigh was injured, that Jacob had a revelation. He was not wrestling with a man, but with God. The being challenging him was an angel or a divine manifestation, and the battle was not just physical, but a metaphor for Jacob's internal struggle with his own identity and past. He finally understood that, throughout his life, he had lived by deceit, trying to control his destiny with his own strength. But now, before God, he had nothing left to hide. He needed, in some way, to surrender, to be honest with himself and with the Creator. By insisting on being blessed, Jacob showed his determination to change, to accept who he truly was and who he could become. He was no longer fleeing from his flaws, but facing them head-on. God, seeing Jacob's sincerity, gave him a new identity. He would no longer be just Jacob, the deceiver, but Israel, the one who wrestled with God and prevailed. This name would not just be a new title, but a mark of his transformation. He was now a different man, spiritually stronger and more aware of his mission. After the struggle, the celestial being blessed Jacob and told him to move on. Jacob, now named Israel, walked toward the dawn, marked not only by the physical pain in his thigh, but by the change that had occurred in his spirit. He understood that the path to true transformation was difficult, and that his internal struggles were just as important as the external ones. The pain in his thigh was not just a reminder of his battle with the divine being, but also a reminder of his journey of growth and redemption. As he crossed the Jabbok River, Jacob knew he was no longer the man who had fled from Esau. He was now Israel, a blessed and strengthened man, ready to face the future with the confidence of one who had wrestled with God and emerged victorious. His past, with all its deceit and mistakes, no longer held the same weight. From that moment on, the most important battle he would fight would be with himself, to remain true to his new identity and the purpose God had entrusted to him. After his struggle with God at the Jabbok River, Jacob felt renewed, but he still carried the anxiety of meeting his brother. He had faced himself and changed, but reconciliation with Esau was the next big test of his journey. He knew that, although their past was marked by anger and betrayal, what would happen now depended on Esau's response. The fear of revenge still loomed over Jacob, but he was determined to face the consequences of what he had done. When they finally met, Jacob, with a heavy heart, bowed before Esau, offering him valuable gifts and humbly asking for forgiveness. The moment was tense, and Jacob did not know what to expect, but to his surprise, Esau, instead of reacting with fury, ran to meet him. The sight of his brother running toward him, with a gentle and welcoming expression, was a blow of mercy for Jacob, who had been preparing for the worst. There was no anger in Esau's eyes, only a warm and emotional embrace, something Jacob had never imagined. Esau's reaction was a clear sign that over the years, he had overcome the pain of betrayal and deceit. Instead of revenge, there was forgiveness and understanding. What Jacob had feared as a final battle turned into a moment of relief and healing. Esau's forgiveness not only healed the wound between the two brothers, but also restored peace to Jacob's soul, who finally saw himself freed from his past of deceit. This reunion was not just a reconciliation between two brothers, but a powerful lesson about forgiveness and the ability to overcome past conflicts. Looking into Esau's eyes, Jacob realized that the true path to peace was left behind when pride and revenge gave way to understanding and genuine forgiveness. This reunion became a memory that Jacob would carry with him for the rest of his life, a reminder that true freedom comes not from running from the past, but from facing the consequences and moving forward with a renewed heart. With the reunion with Esau finally resolved and the weight of his past relieved, Jacob felt it was time to move on to the promised land, Canaan, to establish his family and fulfill God's purpose. He knew the journey would be long and full of challenges, but the weight of vengeance and guilt that had accompanied him for so long had finally been replaced by a new perspective on life. Canaan represented not only a material promise, but also the place where his story of redemption and transformation would be completed. However, upon arriving in Canaan, Jacob soon faced new challenges. The land he had dreamed of conquering was inhabited by peoples who had no intention of living in peace with him and his family. The local tribes viewed the Israelites with suspicion, and tensions quickly began to rise. But beyond the external problems, Jacob also had to deal with internal issues within his own family. The episode involving his daughter Dinah, who was abducted and violated by a man from one of the neighboring tribes, brought out feelings of revenge and anger among Jacob's sons. They demanded justice, and the situation quickly escalated into violent conflict. Jacob, though perplexed and shaken by the tragedy that had befallen Dinah, sought to handle the situation more cautiously. He knew that, to fulfill God's greater purpose for his family, he could not allow himself to be dominated by emotions of vengeance. Dinah's story revealed that the conflicts in Canaan would not be resolved easily or without pain, but it also revealed the strength that Jacob and his family needed to face the obstacles that would arise. Revenge, motivated by pain and honor, led Jacob's sons to commit reckless actions, but it also served as a learning point for the family, who now more than ever needed to seek peace and wisdom in the face of difficulties. The conflict over Dinah brought to light not only the external challenges Jacob would face in Canaan, but also a reminder that, as patriarch, he still needed to guide his family with more than just strategy. He should teach them the patience and forgiveness he himself had learned throughout his journey. The hostile environment of Canaan would further test Jacob's faith and principles, forcing him to reflect on what it truly meant to be a nation chosen by God. Once again, peace between the sons and the neighboring tribes would depend on Jacob's ability to manage chaos and seek reconciliation wherever possible, as he knew that the true strength of a nation lay not in its ability to win external battles, but in its capacity to overcome internal conflicts. Jacob's life in Canaan was far from peaceful. While facing external challenges and growing tension within his own family, a new tragedy befell him. Rachel, the wife he loved deeply and with whom he shared the hope of building a future together, began to show signs that something was wrong during the birth of their second son. The anticipation of a new family member, a son who would bring joy to Jacob's house, quickly turned into unbearable pain. Rachel was fighting for her life, and the moment that should have been one of celebration became a battle against time and death. As she fought, Jacob was by her side, powerless in the face of the situation. He knew that losing Rachel would strike a deep blow to his soul, as she represented the love and renewed hope in his life. When Rachel finally gave birth to Benjamin, their second son, she did not survive the weakness the childbirth imposed on her. Rachel's death left Jacob devastated, shaken as he had never been before. He now held in his hands Benjamin, the beloved son whom his mother had left as a legacy, but the pain of losing Rachel was unbearable. Benjamin's birth, which should have been a moment of great joy, became a bitter reminder of the fragility of life. Jacob, still devastated, named the child with a name that reflected the pain of the moment, Benoni, meaning son of my sorrow. However, later on, other family members, perhaps to give the boy a sense of hope, began calling him Benjamin, son of the right hand, symbolizing the protection and care he should receive, especially because he was Rachel's last son, the beloved wife. Rachel's loss not only marked Jacob deeply, but also changed the family dynamics. The absence of Rachel, who had always been Jacob's great love, would leave a gap that would be hard to fill. He would now have to continue leading the family with a sense of emptiness, but also with the responsibility of protecting Benjamin, the last living reminder of his beloved wife. This tragic moment not only solidified Jacob's bond with Benjamin, but also altered the way he viewed the future of his family, as the pain of Rachel's loss was a constant reminder that, no matter how blessed life might be, it was also filled with suffering and farewells. After Rachel's death, Jacob tried to rebuild his life and the structure of his family. Despite his deep pain, he continued to be the patriarch who guided his sons and sought to maintain order in his household. However, his family was far from perfect, and tension between the brothers began to grow, especially between the sons of his two wives, Rachel and Leah. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, was seen as the one who would bear the greatest responsibility. As the eldest son, he should have been the example for his brothers, but the loyalty and respect Jacob expected from his sons would be tested in ways no one could have imagined. The scandal came in an unexpected and devastating form. Reuben, in a moment of weakness and uncontrollable desire, made a decision that shook the family structure. He became involved with Bilhah, his father's concubine, a woman who was separate from Jacob's main wives, but still part of the family dynamic. By having relations with Bilhah, Reuben committed an act that dishonored his father in an irreparable way. The scandal was significant because, in addition to betraying Jacob, the act was a violation of the respect a son should have for his father's wife. When Jacob discovered what had happened, his pain was deep, and the weight of the scandal hit the family's heart in an irreversible way. Jacob's reaction was one of total disapproval, though he did not act impulsively. Instead of making an immediate judgment and declaring a severe punishment, he kept silent, observing Reuben's behavior and reflecting on the consequences of the transgression. The incident not only shattered Jacob's trust in his firstborn, but also caused a great rupture in the family's relationships. From that moment on, Reuben lost his position of primacy among Jacob's sons, and the leadership role he would have inherited was lost, becoming contested among the other brothers. This episode of betrayal highlighted Jacob's and his sons' human flaws and weaknesses, and revealed that even in the most united families, temptation and sin could destroy what had taken so long to build. What seemed to be an individual moral failure on Reuben's part ended up having significant repercussions for the future of Jacob's entire family. Reuben's mistake would not be easily forgotten, and over time, this event served as a lesson for all of Jacob's sons about the limits of trust and the dangers of dishonor, marking a new and tense chapter in the history of his house. The fate of Jacob's sons was becoming even more complex as time passed. Jacob, now an elderly man with a heart full of painful and transformative experiences, began to reflect on the future of his large family. Each of his sons carried with them the heritage of his name, and his legacy would pass through their lives. But before that could happen, he knew that he should give each of them not just a role in his house, but a destiny that would define them as a nation. Jacob's sons were not just the sons of a patriarch, but would be the foundations of the future tribes of Israel. Each of Jacob's 12 sons would have a unique story, reflecting not only the struggles they faced in their lives, but also the future of an entire nation. Reuben, the firstborn, who had lost his right to leadership, would not be the head of the tribes, but Judah, the fourth son, whose lineage would become the most prominent. The story of Jacob's sons, with all their rivalries, mistakes, and victories, would become a metaphor for the journey of Israel, with each tribe representing different aspects of the people chosen by God. Jacob knew that for his family to survive and thrive, he would need to ensure that each of his sons came together with their hearts set on a purpose greater than their personal disputes. It was inevitable that the brothers would have to learn to work together despite their differences. Joseph, the son of Rachel, Jacob's most beloved, became a crucial figure in the unification of the tribes. His story of betrayal and redemption, of suffering and triumph, would serve as an example for future generations. But more than anything, Jacob understood that the diversity of his sons, with their virtues and flaws, would create a nation that would not only be strong through unity, but also rich in its diversity of character. When Jacob looked at his sons, he saw much more than mere heirs to his possessions. He saw in them the future tribes that, even amidst difficulties and failures, would become the foundation of a nation destined to fulfill God's purpose. He knew that the history of Israel would be marked by struggle and resistance, but also by hope and promise. Jacob's sons, with all their imperfections, were destined to become the 12 tribes that, together, would make the history of the people of Israel. Each tribe would have a mission, a role in the grand divine plan, and that plan began to take shape right there, under Jacob's gaze, as he saw his family become something far greater than he had ever imagined. After years of mourning, Jacob still carried the pain of losing Joseph, his favorite son, whose absence had left an irreplaceable gap in his heart. He never imagined that the one he thought was lost forever would, in fact, be the savior of his family. But fate, as always, had surprises in store. When famine struck the land of Canaan, and Jacob and his sons were forced to go to Egypt in search of food, none of them could have predicted that this journey would lead them to an extraordinary reunion. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they had no idea that the powerful man who governed and organized the food supplies for the needy was, in fact, Joseph. He, who had been sold into slavery by his own brothers, was now leading one of the greatest powers of the ancient world, with enough authority to decide who would live and who would die in the face of the food crisis. Joseph, with his heart marked by the pain of abandonment and the revenge he had held for so many years, found himself face to face with the brothers who had betrayed him, and the internal conflict was immediate. But as he looked at them, he was reminded not only of the betrayal, but also of the promise made by his father and the roots of his family that he could never abandon. Jacob, who feared that his sons were facing a relentless enemy, never imagined that Joseph, the lost son, was still alive, let alone in a position of power. At first, he didn't recognize his sons, as many years had passed and circumstances had changed. But over the course of the encounters and conversations, Joseph realized he could no longer maintain the mask of cold authority that he had assumed when becoming governor of Egypt. He could no longer hide the truth from his brothers, nor from the father who still believed he was dead. In an act of courage, and also of profound love, Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers, breaking the silence and the pain accumulated over so many years. The moment was a whirlwind of emotions. The brothers, incredulous and stunned, found themselves before the brother they had sworn to destroy. Joseph, now in a position of power, could have taken revenge for their past offenses, but he chose forgiveness. He understood that everything that had happened, no matter how painful, was part of God's greater plan for his life and for the survival of his family. Instead of returning evil with evil, Joseph embraced them and forgave them, understanding that fate sometimes leads us down twisted paths, but that God can use even the darkest moments to bring healing and redemption. Joseph's reunion with his brothers was not just a family reconciliation, but proof of the power of forgiveness and God's grace, turning tragedy into an opportunity for salvation for all. After the emotional reunion between Joseph and his brothers, relief and joy began to spread throughout Jacob's household. The revelation that his son was alive brought a new light to his life. However, famine still ravaged the land of Canaan, and Jacob knew he could no longer sustain his large family there. Egypt, which had been the land that saved his sons from starvation, now seemed to be the only safe refuge for all of them. The decision to migrate was not an easy one, but the need to ensure the survival of his family and the desire to be close to Joseph made the move inevitable. Joseph, with great zeal and love, prepared everything for his family's arrival in Egypt. He didn't want to simply give them food. He also wanted to ensure they settled comfortably in a land that was prosperous and where they could live in peace. He asked Pharaoh to allow his brothers and father to settle in the land of Goshen, a fertile region away from the major Egyptian cities, where they could raise their families and flocks in safety. Pharaoh, impressed by Joseph's power and wisdom, gladly agreed and even offered support to ensure Jacob's family would be well received. Jacob, with a heart full of gratitude and longing for Joseph, gathered his sons and set off on a journey that would be both physical and emotional. Crossing the barren desert, Jacob looked at his sons, and although the sadness of losing Rachel still lingered, he felt a renewed hope as he saw his family reunited once more. The journey to Egypt was not just a change of residence. It was a crossing from a difficult phase to a new opportunity. During the journey, Jacob had moments of deep reflection, remembering the promises that God had made to him and his ancestors. He knew that God was with him, guiding each step of this new journey. When they finally arrived in Egypt, Jacob and his family were received with great honor. The return of his sons with Jacob, the patriarch, was a great celebration, and all recognized the greatness of the man who, despite the difficulties and suffering, had managed to reunite his family in such an impressive way. Egypt now became Jacob's new home, and the people of Israel began to prosper again under the protection of his son Joseph. However, although the blessings were abundant, Jacob knew his journey was far from over. He lived with the certainty that once again, the history of his family was intertwining with God's plans, and the migration to Egypt was just an important chapter in that divine plan. As Jacob grew older, his eyes began to cloud, and his body was no longer as strong as before. However, his spirit remained firm, and he knew that the time had come to leave a lasting legacy for his sons and future generations. He felt compelled to bless them, not just with material wealth, but with words of wisdom and prophecy, like a father who understands the importance of preparing his children for the challenges ahead. Jacob called all his sons to his side, asking them to gather around his bed. He knew these moments would be the last he spent with them, and he wanted to leave something of immortal value. With a trembling voice, but with the authority of a patriarch, Jacob began to bless each of his sons. He looked deeply into the eyes of Reuben, his firstborn, and lamented the loss of his honored position due to the mistakes he had made. Jacob's pain in giving this blessing was evident, but he did not hesitate to speak the truth. Looking at Simeon and Levi, he rebuked them for their violence, but also warned them of the consequences of their actions. However, when Jacob looked at Judah, his heart filled with a peace that only years of wisdom could bring. He prophesied that Judah would become the most powerful tribe, and from it would come the king of Israel, a just and anointed leader. This prophecy would be fulfilled with the birth of David, and later, with the birth of Jesus, who would come from the lineage of Judah. The most moving blessing was that of Joseph, his beloved son, whom he had believed to have lost forever. Jacob, with deep emotion, spoke about how Joseph had been a pillar of strength for his family, and how he would be a lasting blessing. He declared that Joseph's descendants would be numerous and strong, and that his lineage would prosper in distant lands. By blessing each of his sons, Jacob not only gave them directions for the future, but also guided them on a spiritual journey, helping them understand that their lives were not only about the present, but about the legacy they would leave behind. Jacob's blessings, with their prophetic words, were far from mere predictions. They were expressions of a father's desire for a prosperous future for his sons, but also a reflection of Jacob's understanding that the story of his family wouldn't end with him. Each son would become a tribe with its own identity, its own struggles and victories, but united in a larger divine purpose. Jacob knew that his words would resonate through the ages, and with that, he was handing his sons the key to understanding the purpose of their lives within God's great plan. Jacob knew his time was running out. He had already fulfilled his mission of bringing the family together, blessing his sons, and securing the future of his lineage. But as death approached, he felt the peace of someone who had done what needed to be done. Lying on his bed, surrounded by his sons and grandsons, Jacob had one last vision of his life, recalling the struggles and triumphs that marked his years. His life's journey had not been easy, but he had learned to trust in God every step of the way, and that was the most precious legacy he could leave for his children. Before passing, Jacob requested that his sons bury him in the land of Canaan, in the field of Machpelah, near his wife Leah, where Abraham and Isaac were also buried. He wanted to be buried in the land God had promised to his ancestors, as a symbol of his faith in the divine promise that would transcend generations. This final request was not just an act of love for his wife, but a way for Jacob to affirm that God's promise to his descendants was still in place, even though he would no longer be there to witness it. It was as if, with his death, he was passing the baton to his sons, trusting that God's covenant would remain firm through them. When Jacob died, sorrow overtook his family. His sons were devastated by the loss of their father, but at the same time, they knew he had left a legacy that would live on forever. It wasn't just the blessings he had given them, but the lessons of faith, perseverance, and trust in God that they now carried with them. Jacob had been the foundation that united the brothers, guiding them through the storms of their lives and preparing them for what was to come. Jacob's death was not the end, but the beginning of a new era for his family. After the mourning, Jacob's sons fulfilled their father's wish and buried him in the promised land. And as Jacob's body rested next to his parents, his spirit continued to live on in the generations to come. His sons, now transformed into 12 tribes, followed in the patriarchs' footsteps and built the nation of Israel. Jacob's story, with all its highs and lows, struggles and victories, remained a powerful testimony that despite human failures, God's plan would be fulfilled. Jacob's legacy was not just in the words he spoke, but in how his life reflected the power of transformation and divine redemption. Thus, even in death, Jacob continued to live, shaping the history of a chosen people led by God's will. And so, we reach the end of Jacob's journey, a man whose life was marked by challenges, deceit, and profound transformations, but who, in the end, saw the fulfillment of God's promises for his descendants. His story teaches us about faith, perseverance, and the importance of trusting in divine plans, even when the path seems uncertain. If you enjoyed this video and were touched by Jacob's story, leave your comment below, sharing what impressed you most about this journey. Don't forget to like and share with your friends so more people can know this incredible story of faith and legacy. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now so you don't miss the upcoming videos full of inspiring stories and life lessons. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.